Folks, I am very happy to welcome to As the World Churns the founder and the editor-in-chief of The Lever, David Sirota, who is also an Oscar-nominated writer and worked on Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. And your latest piece, David, I have lots of thoughts about how to end Democrats' civil war. First, do you believe that Democrats are truly in the midst of a civil war right now? Or do you feel like there is a clarifying that is happening around who should actually be in charge of the Democratic Party?
I definitely think it's a chaotic moment for the Democrats. I mean, they don't really have a coherent, cogent party-wide message other than Donald Trump is bad. That's telling the public what the party is against, not
Right.
necessarily telling anybody what the party is actually for. It's not really clear what the party is for. And I do think that this has been part of the Democratic Party's problem for a long time, that the party has trouble coherently expressing and communicating what it is for because it is constantly caught between trying to appease its donor class, but
Mm-hmm.
also speak to the grievances and outrage of the voters. And the problem is that lots and lots of voters, I think, feel angry about the things that the donor class is doing. So if you're trying to make the donor class happy and also speak to the grievances of the public, you end up, if you try to serve both of those groups, you end up sounding incoherent or having no other message than Donald Trump sucks. And that's just not enough. And so I think this question of which side is the Democratic Party on? Is it a donor oligarch party for
Mm-hmm.
a kind of what you might think of as the old Rockefeller Republican Party, right? The
Mm-hmm.
old
Mm-hmm.
Rockefeller Republican Party was sort of an elite country club Republican Party that didn't win lots of elections. It was kind of a permanent minority party. Is that what the Democratic Party is? Or is the Democratic Party going to try to move back to some updated new version of a New Deal Democratic Party that actually tries to represent the economic interests of the working class? And I think that is effectively the war going on inside of the Democratic Party between the factions. And I think the jury's out on who's going to win that battle.
And one would argue that the people with the most money, right, have the bigger microphone and then therefore can be declared the winner. So we're seeing this play out right now in New York City with the mayoral race between Zorin and Cuomo. Zorin is a person of the people, Workers' Party. In all the ways, he is the antithesis of Cuomo, that is establishment backed by billionaires. I will put aside all the sexual harassment, the stealing of money during COVID, all of those things. But you see how the forces in power are aligning against Zorin because they see him as a threat to their power. And I wonder, when you're looking at this, when you're looking at that as kind of a microcosm, and we also in your piece you look at Kamala Harris and the inability of her campaign to call out and be totally anti-oligarchy, and that being what I think was also a hindrance, that Gaza and and some some other missteps that were made in her short amount of time. How do you see these? How do you see the public looking at these two kind of examples and saying, if Kamala Harris had gone full anti-oligarchy, do you think that that would have resulted in something different? Do you think that New York City is a test case for if our establishment Democrats kind of looking and saying, let's see how this plays out? Because if Zorin is able to hold on, and Cuomo isn't ranked at all, right, or is ranked low, is that the blueprint then for how this party moves forward?
I think the ultimate question is, how much money does it take to defeat in when you look at New York? How much money does it take to defeat a populist message? And I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think it's zero sum. I think that the fact that Zoran Mamdani is even competitive in this race at all, let's take that as I mean, that is incredible unto itself, in the sense of when you look at how much money is being spent against him. The fact that he is competitive in polls in this race shows how much anger there is out there at the current economic status quo. I mean, think about New York City. It really is a microcosm, a kind of extreme microcosm. It is a city where 1 in 4 people are living in poverty and where 1 in 24 people are millionaires. Right? We're talking about unbelievably extreme levels of wealth inequality in a city where if you're in the 1 in 4, you can barely afford anything. The candidate, Zoran Mamdani, is getting outspent by a super PAC that has one super PAC alone has raised $24 million. So barely able to compete on the airwaves, right? In terms of buying television ads to communicate a message. And yet the message is so strong that he is able to nonetheless be competitive and make this a competitive race. So the question is the message enough to overcome the resources being thrown against him? And to be clear, the resources are so aligned against him precisely because of the kind of message that he is offering. A message that says we're going to raise taxes on millionaires, the affordability crisis is a problem, oligarchy is a problem, the billionaire class is a problem, right? So it is kind of a pure test of how much money, from the oligarch perspective, how much money do we need to spend to overcome an incredibly popular message in a city that has become an economic dystopia, right? And so at the end of the day, if the election is extremely close, oh, we spent $30 million. Okay, so it takes $30 million to eke out a victory in a situation where 1 in 4 people are living in poverty against a candidate who's running a populist message, right? We're going to learn what the threshold is. But I would say we have to step back and say, this is how broken our politics are, right? I mean, really, we did an audio series at The Lever called Master Plan about the legalization of corruption, the legalization of the buying and selling of elections, and what that means for democracy. New York is experiencing that right now. You have a city with 1 in 4 people in poverty where somebody giving voice to that has a chance to win. What ends up aligning, and I'm obviously not blaming him, but ends up aligning the collective power of the oligarchy to stop it. And to be clear, to try to distract the discourse from a discussion about people's economic lives that they're living. I mean, I'm not in New York, but I look at it from afar and I say, I don't understand, as an example. I don't really, I mean, I do understand, but I put it this way. It is shocking that a city where 1 in 4 people are living in poverty and 1 in 24 people are millionaires, and if you're not a millionaire, you can barely afford anything, if at all. And yet much of the discourse in the final week of the campaign is about how each candidate feels about a foreign country on the other side of the world, right? Like this is the democracy crisis, that the discourse isn't about, I can't afford anything to live in my own city, that the oligarchs, that the power of money to drive and influence through the media, through ads, influence what the discussion is, what people think they are voting on, is not necessarily the economic crisis in their daily lives. It's what do the candidates think about the country of Israel on the other side of the world. And my point is, I don't care what side of the Israel-Palestine debate you're on. It is a problem when your municipal election about how to fix your economy, et cetera, isn't mostly about your local community. And I say that it's a particular problem when, I mean, this is not even a federal race, right? They're not making foreign policy, right? They're making municipal policy. So this is the bait and switch This is how money controls elections. It controls the focus and the discourse and what we think elections are about. Now, I will say, I don't know if their trick is going to work. This trick of, oh, this election is about every other issue other than the economic dystopia right here in New York City. I don't know if their trick is going to work. That's why it's such a fascinating race to see if all the
What
money
mess? Yeah.
and the tricks can work.
Because that is what money affords you the ability to do, is change the narrative and
Exactly.
put all of the resources behind whatever narrative that you want to put out. And then people, I mean, I actually equate it to, in the movie The Devil Wears Prada, where she's holding up the sweater and says, like, this sweater is cerulean, and like it was decided for you in this room by a group of
Yes.
people that this was going to be the color of the season, right? And that is how our politics is run at a very basic level. You have a group of donors that get into a room at a very expensive restaurant, have a very expensive dinner, and decide these are the three issues that the people are going to care about, and we're going to infiltrate their mind and their day to day. We're going to push it through social media. We're going to push it through the airwaves. We're going to push it through television, and then all of a sudden, I'm sitting around at a table with barely any food on it, medicine I can't afford, talking about who is for Israel or who is for Palestine. And I don't even understand how I got into this position in the first fucking place when I have an eviction notice on my door.
Yeah,
I,
it's
I
it's
like,
it's such a good point, and we should understand that it comes out of the old science of advertising. I mean,
mm,
really, if we want to get deep about this, right? Advertisers understand, the most sophisticated corporate advertisers, right? For whatever product they're selling, they're not just selling the product. They're selling and creating the demand for the product. They're not just saying, you need this thing. They're actually using their advertising to try to create your demand for a thing that you didn't even know you wanted
yep,
or you don't necessarily need. So it's the same thing in politics. An election, in a vacuum, an election for the mayoralty of New York should probably be about how do we make sure fewer than 1/4 of our population is in poverty? How do we make sure people can afford living their daily lives? That should be, in a vacuum, what an election should be about. But the way money works is it can essentially try to buy the terms of the
yep.
debate and buy, thus and so, what the election is perceived to be about. And that, to my mind, is the democracy crisis. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not all gloom and doom about this. I want to go back to a point that we just made, that we were just talking about.
Hmm.
A candidate is being wildly outspent with a very simple message. This city is unaffordable. It's unacceptable that it's unaffordable. And that candidate is competitive. So I am optimistic, not necessarily about this election. Like, I don't know what's going to happen in New York's election, but I am optimistic that more and more people have caught on to the sleight of hand, that more
Yes.
and more people are not buying the bullshit. They understand that they are being fed bullshit. Now, the problem is where does that realization go? Where does it get
Hmm.
channeled into? I think Donald Trump has done a really good job of channeling it into his movement, waking up from the fact that you're being fed bullshit. Where that outrage is channeled, that's the contest for the future of this country.
And here's the thing, is that, like, Donald Trump has done a very good job of funneling that into white grievance. That
Yes.
if we just go get rid of all of the undocumented people, all the people of color, all the queer people, all the trans people, all the people with disabilities, then your life is going to be better. Except, here's where I think that the breaking is coming. And we saw that with the No Kings protests, and millions of people in this country and millions around the world marching and saying, you know what? What I realize is that you've passed all these policies to stop trans people from playing sports and using the bathroom. And guess what? I still can't fucking afford my medication. And guess what? My mortgage rate is still really high, right? And so you've gotten rid of all these undocumented people, and you're sending them to these foreign gulags to die for no other reason than trying to make a better life for themselves. And guess what? My food prices have gone up. And guess what? Like, things have become increasingly more unaffordable, right? So what I think initially, right? Because I believe that racism and misogyny will always trump things in this inside of America. But what those that voted for white grievance recognize is that nothing in their lives have actually changed over the last 5 months. And to be fair, I should say change for the better, because they have changed. They've been changing for the worse. And all of the projections show we haven't hit bottom yet. Right? Because the tariffs actually haven't really taken hold. And now we're on the verge of World War III. And so when I think about what you're offering in your piece, which I think is important, is can Democrats come to this middle ground? Can we get from this abundance propaganda, is what I'm going to call it, because I really just believe that it is Reaganomics in a different fucking outfit, in a different century. That's all that it is. Everything that Ezra Klein and that they offered in that book, I'm just like, this all sounds eerily familiar. I'm old enough to not actually fall for the rope-a-dope in this like nuanced language, because you want to use the word abundance and then people feel full and good about it. On the other side of that is the populist argument that Democrats have never fully really wrapped their hands around. And for the reason is because they get money from the same fucking people that the Republicans get money from. Right?
Exactly.
And so you
Exactly.
have just this small group of people, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC and a few voices that have tried to say, hey, let us stop with the division with identity and with race and with all of these other things, because we have a common enemy, right? It actually is the billionaire class. But I think now, David, what is really interesting is that I think for the first time, I don't know. Is the wool coming off of people's eyes? Do they really believe that, wait a minute, it isn't the undocumented person down the street that's been picking the vegetables that I'm able to afford and put on my table? It isn't the trans person that, oh, by the way, most Americans don't even know a trans person. So it isn't this boogeyman that is stopping me from actualizing my version of the American dream. Do you think that that wool coming over the eyes then releases us from the idea that we have to compromise? That, like, could the people and their desire to actually live full and truly abundant lives weigh out what the oligarchs actually want and are pushing?
Well, I think yes, there is going to be, and there is right now, a realization that Donald Trump is a circus that is not solving people's problems in their daily lives, right? Like Donald Trump is offering up the old bread and circuses. I would argue that the abundance folks are offering up a different version of it, that they're saying the government is the problem. The government is the barrier. The government, unions, the left, quote unquote, is the barrier to Americans' prosperity. Our oligarchs behind us are not the problem.
Right.
Donald Trump says immigrants, gay people, liberals, academics, et cetera, they're the problems, not the oligarchs behind Donald Trump. The commonality is that the oligarchs are the ones being defended. And that is not an accident. The reason I think that has not, the realization that this is all a bait and switch has not redounded to the political benefit of the Democrats yet, is because I also think that even if you realize this is all bullshit, all of this political noise is bullshit to defend the oligarchs behind the curtain, if there's no alternative, if there's no real alternative to
Yep.
that,
Yep.
then you're not necessarily going to support the fake alternative, which is a Democratic Party that doesn't really yet stand for much of anything. What's gone on, frankly, the last 20, 30 years is I kind of see it as lots of people say, okay, listen, both parties are offering me nothing on the economy. They're not
Mm-hmm.
offering to really make my life any better. I can't see exactly how they're going to make my life better. So all politics really must be then is just a culture war circus. It's just a circus about identity and culture and et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm either not going to participate in politics because it's not meaningful, or if I participate, I'll just participate based on which side of the circus I like knowing that no one's that it's not really about anything that affects my actual daily life. And I think that's why you've seen so many people drop out of the political process,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like they don't got time, they don't have time for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't have a lot of time lately to watch reality TV shows, so I don't watch a lot of it. I think a lot of people say politics is just one big reality
Reality
TV
TV
show.
show.
No
Yep.
one's really on. And look, I might once in a while, it might entertain me, but like I'm not going to take it seriously, because nothing there is actually promising or offering any way that it's going to actually positively impact my life. But I think that's the opportunity, right? I do think there's a yearning out there for a politics that is meaningful. And I think that's because things have gotten so bad. I think, again, I'll go back to the New York race, right? And I would broaden it out to Bernie Sanders, too. I mean, I worked for Bernie Sanders, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Bernie Sanders was able to be a competitive candidate, he didn't win, but able to be a competitive candidate. The fact that Mamdani is able to be a competitive candidate. The fact that AOC was able to be a competitive candidate and actually win that congressional race. They had all of the odds stacked against them. In a previous generation, they may have been completely fringe candidates who never had any shot at all. But the fact that they are competitive says that the anger, the visceral anger and desire and yearning is real, because it's able to that anger is persisting despite the best efforts of the billionaire class to keep it down and keep people demoralized and disillusioned.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going to happen in this election, but I agree with, I mean, I saw Zoran say, there are no moral victories. I don't think if he loses in a close race, it's a quote moral victory. But I do think if the results show that the race was competitive, if I was an oligarch, if I was a billionaire, I'd be sitting back saying, I guess I'm glad we won this race, but the tide seems to be turning. That anger is not going away. Like there's only so much we can do to keep it at bay, right? And so
100%.
I look at this. I try to take like the longer view of history. Right, the longer view of history, and I maybe that makes me sort of a crazy optimist, but that's how I look at it.
We will leave it there today, but I appreciate the optimism, because I do believe that given everything that feels very dark and is very bad, that there is a great awakening that is taking place
Yes.
and taking shape inside of this country, and sometimes things have to get incredibly bad in order for people to recognize, wait a minute, how did we get here? Right. I wasn't present. I wasn't showing up. And also, I've been fed a bunch of fucking lies. Right.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
exhausted by it. And I'm exhausted by both parties doing it. And that's how power goes back into the hands of the people.
I mean, it's not I would add one last thing. It is not a coincidence that the New Deal came out of the Great Depression. I just think that's a very,
Yep.
and I don't think either of us are wishing that things get
No.
worse in order to get better. But I do think, I mean, the old cliche, it's always darkest before the dawn.
Yep.
Right? Like the New Deal comes out of the Great Depression because the public realized that the bullshit that the corporate class of the 1920s was feeding the public was bullshit. And out of that came the policies that truly made this country great. Right. I mean, they weren't perfect. Right. They the civil rights movement hadn't happened yet. And that took another, 30, 40 years to really come to fruition in the 1960s. But the point is that the policies that built the middle class of this country, when this country was not the sort of economic 1% versus 99% dystopia, it came out of something horrible. And so I look at that and I say, you know what? It's bad now, but good things can come out of the bad.
David Sirota, we will leave it there today. Folks, the piece is How to End Democrats' Civil War, and it is up right now at The Lever. I appreciate you and hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.